This is a lesson that military thinkers have understood for centuries, and Iran applied it with remarkable clarity. Even after losing its supreme leader, Iran's ability to continue coordinated operations did not disappear as many would have expected. The idea of weaponizing the Strait of Hormuz is not something that appeared overnight in Iran. The world immediately pays attention when its oil supply is threatened. And operational responsibilities had been pushed deep down the chain of command. The system was designed to continue functioning even if the entire senior leadership was lost. Jai Hind, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Geopolitics Frontline. In this episode, we shall be discussing the mechanics of how Iran fought. We'll try and understand the Mosaic Defence Strategy, the history behind the Strait of Hormuz, how Iran turned this important piece of geography into something more powerful than any nuclear weapon, and lastly, who is winning this war. So sit tight, don't go anywhere, and do watch it till the very end. So now we come to the Iranian side of the story. Because if there is one thing that surprised all, it was not the fact that Iran fought back. Everyone expected Iran to fight back. The surprise was that even after suffering serious blows to its command structure, to its infrastructure, even after losing its supreme leader, Iran's ability to continue coordinated operations did not disappear as many would have expected. To understand why, we need to go back into history. The idea of weaponizing the Strait of Hormuz is not something that appeared overnight in Iran. The concept itself is centuries old. Maritime powers have long understood that if you cannot match your opponent ship for ship or aircraft for aircraft, then what do? Then you attack what he depends upon the most. In the modern world, that dependency is energy. The most relevant example before this conflict was the tanker wars in the 1980s during the Iran and Iraq war. During that period, commercial shipping became a battlefield. Tankers were attacked, sea lanes became dangerous. Insurance costs surged, energy markets became nervous. Eventually, American involvement increased, and Iran learnt a lesson that it never forgot. The world may ignore your sufferings, but the world immediately pays attention when its oil supply is threatened. That lesson shaped Iranian strategic thinking for decades, and finally what happened in 2026. Now look at what happened during this conflict. Israel and America targeted senior layers of the Iranian hierarchy. The expectation in many quarters was simple. You cut off the head and the rest of the body falls. But that did not happen. This suggests something very important. Iran appears to have prepared for this scenario long before the first missile was even fired. Orders, contingency plans, and operational responsibilities had been pushed deep down the chain of command. The system was designed to continue functioning even if the entire senior leadership was lost. In other words, the fight was not dependent upon Khamenei's last-minute approvals for retaliation. The second aspect was the way Iran chose to fight. It did not rely on mass troop movements. It did not attempt large-scale invasions. Instead, it relied heavily on drones, missiles, and long-range vectors. There was a simple reason for this. Iran understands that a conventional confrontation against a militarily superior opponent would be enormously costly. This is where modern warfare is heading. We saw this during Op Sindoor. Now we were seeing this on a bigger canvas. A drone costing a fraction of an interceptor missile can force an advanced military to spend enormous sums defending itself. Missile swarms can stretch the air defense systems. Long-range vectors can create uncertainty without requiring boots on the ground. Iran demonstrated that even if you cannot dominate the skies, you can still impose costs on your adversary. But perhaps the most important thing that Iran demonstrated was geography as its most lethal weapon. Because while the drones attracted headlines and the missiles dominated television screens, Iran's most powerful tool was neither of them. Its most powerful tool was a narrow stretch of water through which approximately 20% of the world's energy supply flows every single day. The Strait of Hormuz was more powerful and more important than a nuclear missile. And once Iran decided to leverage that geography, the conflict became a global economic crisis. It became a hostage situation for the world's energy market. Now we come to the heart of the story. Why was the entire world suddenly worried about a conflict taking place in the Middle East? Why were governments issuing statements? Why were energy traders watching every development with nervous anticipation? Why did markets react the way they did? The answer lies in one narrow stretch of water, the Strait of Hormuz. You see, modern civilization runs on energy. Factories run on energy. Transportation runs on energy. Global trade runs on energy. Militaries run on energy. Entire economies rise and fall depending upon the availability of energy. Take away that and everything is lost. And that is precisely why Hormuz matters. For decades, Iranian planners have known that, and they cannot compete with the United States in terms of aircraft carriers. They cannot outspend America. They cannot outproduce America. They cannot outgun America in a conventional conflict. Therefore, they have always looked for strategic levers. They have always looked for pressure points. They have always looked for ways to make stronger countries feel pain without having to defeat them militarily. The Strait of Hormuz is the holy grail of such pressure point, and when the conflict escalated, Iran did what countries under pressure often do. They weaponized its geography. This is where many people misunderstand what happened. Iran did not need to sink every tanker. It did not need to physically stop every ship because it simply wasn't capable of. Did it matter? No. It only needed to convince the world that shipping through Hormuz had become dangerous. The moment that perception takes hold, the consequences begin multiplying. Insurance premiums rise, shipping costs rise, freight costs rise, energy prices obviously escalated, investors become nervous, markets become volatile, governments start making contingency plans, and suddenly a regional conflict becomes everybody's problem. And that is exactly what happened. The objective was more economic than military. Iran understood that every major power involved in the conflict had one vulnerability in common. Their population depended upon oil. The global economy depended upon uninterrupted oil flows. Therefore, if Iran could threaten these flows, it could create pressure on the world. Now, if your opponent is stronger than you militarily, then do you attack him up front or do you attack him from the front? Obviously not. What do? You attack something that he values. If your opponent possesses superior firepower, then target his dependencies. If you cannot match his strength, then exploit his vulnerabilities. This is a lesson that military thinkers have understood for centuries, and Iran applied it with remarkable clarity. There is another reason why this crisis became so significant. The world had spent decades becoming comfortable with globalization. Energy would come from one region, manufacturing would come from another, and consumption would take place somewhere else. The system worked because everybody assumed that critical trade routes would remain open. Hormuz reminded the world that this assumption could not be taken for granted. This is why the crisis was far bigger than Iran versus Israel or Iran versus America. What the whole world witnessed was the weaponization of dependency. And perhaps the biggest consequence of all of this was the message it sent to the rest of the world. The message was simple. Dependence is vulnerability. Whether it is oil, natural gas, rare earths, semiconductors, or shipping lanes, the principle shall remain the same. The Strait of Hormuz also reminded the world of a very old truth. Geography still matters. And while the world was busy watching missiles fly across the Middle East, there was another country reaping the benefits. Any guesses? Well, of course, it was China. Because if there was one major power that stood to benefit from the strategic distraction created by this conflict, it was China.
Fight, my minions.
Now, whenever America gets dragged into a conflict, China usually ends up smiling. Whenever Russia gets dragged into a conflict, China usually ends up smiling again. Why? Because while everybody else is busy fighting, China is busy expanding its influence. Just look at what happened over the last few years. The Russia-Ukraine conflict weakened the entire Russian influence across several regions where Moscow once enjoyed unquestioned dominance. As Russia became occupied elsewhere, China started moving in. Central Asia is perhaps the best example. At least these places were once firmly under the Russian sphere of influence. Now they have found themselves dealing with a far more active China. The same principle applies here. While America was focused on Iran, Israel, oil prices, and the Strait of Hormuz, China was looking at the bigger picture. China understands something very well. Time is a weapon, and if your rival is busy fighting somewhere, that is the time you can use to strengthen your own position elsewhere. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope you liked it. Do share, comment, and subscribe, and do stay tuned for the next video in this entire series where we'll be talking about what exactly does the future of the Middle East looks like. Thank you for watching. Jai Hind and Vanakkam.